Welcome back to our mini-series, The Lone Screenplay Winners, where we talk about films that only won an Oscar in the writing categories. I'm your host, Matthew Anderson, and today we have back on the podcast, it feels like it's been, I want to say, close to a year since we had him back on, the host of the Mendez Movie Report, Louis A. Mendez. Louis, how you doing, man?
I'm doing pretty good. As we record this, I'm in the middle of my self-imposed mental break, but I did promise you that I would be on here to talk about this movie, so here I am.
And I also want to make it well aware that I didn't force him to come out of hiding for this. I was well aware that he was on a hiatus, and I said, no, whatever you want to do this episode, if you want to wait until the summer or until the fall, we can wait until then. But he's like, no, I'll come on for this. I'm like, okay, all right. Yeah, so this will be an interesting debate that we have here, because even though Louis already knows my thoughts ahead of time, in fact, this actually might be one of the first times in maybe a while that a guest of mine already knows my initial thoughts on this. But I still think we can get a fair amount of discussion out of this, if nothing else, about the awards race for this. So, so why don't we do that? So, without further ado, we're just going to jump right into our discussion, which will be a full-on spoiler review for Conclave. Once again, if you haven't seen the movie yet, please go ahead and watch it and then come back to listen to us talk about it in full. So this is a film that recently won the Adapted Screenplay Academy Award in 2024, which right now, we're recording this, by the way, in like April, so we're like a little bit ahead of schedule with podcast recordings, but regardless. So Conclave came out in 2024, recently won the Adapted Screenplay Academy Award, and it was written by Peter Strawn and directed by Edward Berger. And just a reminder in what the premise of it is, it's essentially about Cardinal Lawrence is tasked with leading one of the world's most secretive and ancient events, selecting a new pope. And he finds himself at the center of a web of conspiracies and intrigue that could shake the very foundation of the Catholic Church. So before we begin our full-on discussion, debate, whatever you want to call it, I wanted to ask you, Louis, why was it that you wanted to come back on for this episode?
Well, I came back on because you had asked me if I could come on to talk about Conclave, but I think it's because you're well aware that how much I love this movie. Wicked is my favorite film of 2024, but if Wicked did not exist, Conclave would be my favorite film of 2024. I've seen this movie, I think now 4 times. I rewatched it right before we came in to record here, and I just really enjoyed it. I think it's got a lot to say about faith in a secular world. I think maybe if for people who are not of faith, there's something here in regard to sort of the way that sometimes we go electing people in power, and how certain scandals or outright luck or events that are out of people's control can lead to certain outcomes. And it's just a movie that the first time I saw it, and I got to see it with an audience, because unfortunately Focus Features, for whatever reason, doesn't really give us press screenings down here in my market. We basically got to wait till the end of the year when they eventually send us an online screener links. And I got to see it with an audience, and I think from that first viewing I knew right away that it was going to be a film that was going to do well with general audiences. And honestly, it's a little bit surprising in hindsight that it does as well with general audiences, because it does take some controversial turns, particularly the ending. And it is a very talky film. And I think of a movie that just came out, also from Focus Features, earlier this year, Black Bag. And Black Bag, I personally love Black Bag. It's my current favorite film of 2025. I'm not sure if I'd be surprised if it stays that way, but I really like the movie. But I can tell you, as someone who had to watch that movie with audiences, that movie has not the greatest audience scores, not bad audience scores, but not the greatest, and I think it's because of the talky sense of it. It's not really a spy film, and I think this movie is a talky film as well. But because, and this is where I think the screenplay win comes into effect. I think because the dialogue and the way that how important everything that every character says is, I think that helped make it a hit with audiences on top of this sort of light thriller, religious thriller aspect to it. And I think that's why it ended up being sort of this small box office success and ended up having the strong awards run that it did. To the point that not only is this, obviously our lone screenplay winner from 2024, but I believe was very likely, though unfortunately they never released the tallies, which always annoys me because I like to theorize what the order was, but I believe may have been number 2 in Best Picture.
We will discuss that later in the show. I find it's funny you mentioned about the fact that I practically begged you to come on the show because it's, keep in mind, audience, we had discussed about this coming on, Lewis coming back on potentially for Conclave, and I was thinking, and it'd been so long ago, at least with how much stuff has been going on over the last couple months, especially with the awards run itself, that when I was rewatching it again for the show, I just thought to myself, wait a minute, why did Lewis pick this? I can't remember. Then I realized, oh yeah, that's right, I did practically, not quite point a gun at you and to have you come on the show, but I was very much like, you got to come on the show so we could have an interesting discussion. And also, again, you had already knew what my thoughts were at the time, because I want to preference this to my audience. I did watch this with a live crowd at my first viewing. In fact, I had to, long story short, I had just got back, when I first saw this, I had just got back from LA to hang out with my cousin. And I was on a flight back home like Monday morning. I spent the whole day flying from LA to Pennsylvania. And I thought, I'll sleep it off, and then I have a little bit of jet lag, but I still want to sleep it off. So I slept off the whole night. I wake up Tuesday morning, because that was my day off from work at the time. And I'm like, you know what? I'll go see Conclave at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock. I'll go see it. Even though I'm a little bit jet lagged, I'm a little bit sleepy, whatever, I'll go see it. And I was like, all right, yeah, let's finally watch the movie that everyone has been praising and telling me, oh, Matt, this is one of the best movies of the year. And I come out of it and I'm like, really, guys? That was quote unquote, one of the better or best films of the year, or the most talked about films of the year. And then I unfortunately had the misgivings of thinking to myself, when we were through the awards process, of I think it was someone on Twitter said something like, we were all debating about who could potentially win editing at the Oscars, which we'll talk about that surprise win again later on in the show. And I thought to myself, am I going to have to revisit Conclave a second time, even though I promised myself I wouldn't? So I'm like, all right, I'll throw it on again. And then my rating went down much lower. And then I watched the third, and then my third time I watched it, I was like, yeah, it's about the same, honestly. It got a little worse. And I think it also, one of the many reasons why I'm not the biggest fan of this film pretty much at all is because of the fact that I don't really, so I see where a lot of people are coming from. Lewis is definitely one of the many people on, he's one of many people who I've talked with who love Conclave, especially with how it talks about, as you said, it's faith, it's the way that we deal with politics within a certain organization, and how we vote on who should become, the leader of our said organization or group or whatever you call themselves, whether it's the church, the president of the United States, whoever it may be. And I could definitely see where you're coming from. I personally just don't find the melodrama to be that interesting or that fascinating to begin with, just because the material itself is not that deep or complex. It's a lot of interesting ideas that it tries to explore for me, but it only does it more on a surface level. There's nothing about it, in my opinion, from the drama that made it so intriguing or fascinating to watch. Even with how we find out Cardinal Lawrence is, essentially he comes to a point where he starts having a buddy of his, I can't remember the character's name, but he asks a buddy of his to do some deep diving of what happened with Cardinal Tremblay, who was John Lithgow's character. I want to do a little bit more dissecting of this this other potential candidate for becoming the Pope, and we find out that he had an affair with a 19-year-old kid when he was in his 30s, and they had a child, and things like that. And I think all these are interesting ideas to explore, and it does, to the film's credit, it does try to tackle some of these complex issues of not just, the fact that no one here is flawed. And even in his homily, Cardinal Lawrence mentions that let us pray for a pope who doubts his own faith and who's a flawed individual, and yet all these people are flawed individuals in their own way. But again, it's just not really explored for me in a way that's interesting or fascinating to watch from start to finish. Despite all the actors in it are trying their best to make this material work and stick, but at the end of the day, I just didn't really care all that much about it. But that's pretty much my short version of it overall. But let's dive deep into it. So what were some scenes for you, Lewis, on this? I think you said fourth watch already. What were some scenes in it that you wanted to discuss for the podcast, or anything that stood out for you in particular on this fourth rewatch?
Well, I mean, this is something that's been evolving in my mind regarding analyzing the film with each rewatch, and that's these days, this movie is not necessarily a faith-based film. This is a film that was produced and made by filmmakers who are trying to make a this religious thriller. This is not Angel Studios doing some movie that's geared only towards Christians. And my issue has been with a lot of faith-based films. As someone who is a faith and is very into the esoteric, is that I always feel like they don't really challenge themselves. I don't feel like they really explore all that much. They seem to kind of just want to be reverent towards whatever they're covering and stay in the bubble for their target audience. It's not to say that there aren't some that are like okay. I think I remember, I think not this past Thanksgiving, but the Thanksgiving before, going with my mom to see. I forget the name of it, but it was like this nativity story musical that was put together by Faith Base. I think it may have even been Angel Studios, but I'd have to double check. And
Okay.
it was okay, but it was. It was, it was the same old, we're kind of preaching to the choir. We're not really going to take chances here. And what frustrates me about this, that there have been good faith-based films in the past. You have classics like the Ten Commandments, Ben-Hur, which won Best Picture, Prince of Egypt, obviously. There's been these great biblical epics and stories that target faith. Heck, even to some extent, even though it's a horror movie, The Exorcist, where the
Yep.
priests are the heroes, and yet there's this the main protagonist of the priest he's doubting his own faith, and unfortunately that I don't really get to see that much from faith-based productions, even though it's unfortunate to me. And then here comes Conclave, and I think it does, for me, it did tackle a lot of that stuff in terms of that. These are men who believe that they are electing the Pope, but they believe that God is guiding them, that God is going to pick the right, through them is going to pick the right leader. And when they go up there to cast their vote, they have a little prayer where they say that they believe that they are casting the vote that they think is right, that they think God would think is right. And when you really get down to it, a bunch of them, their personal ambitions, their personal egos, these scandals start to happen, and in a way they start kind of being a bit hypocritical. Well, not in a way, they straight up at times are kind of hypocritical about the whole process. I mean, Lawrence goes through this thing where at first he's just like, I'm just trying to do my job so I can leave out of here because I'm having a crisis of faith and I don't feel like I'm good for the job anymore. And yet, even though he knows that he's planning to leave after this, he gets so caught up in this belief that he starts kind of doing these things that he said he wasn't gonna do. Like he, to the point that he breaks the seal to get into the Holy Father's quarters.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what the correct term is, but he starts getting more and more involved, even though as he tries to tell himself he's not involved. I mean, there's one point where he snaps at his friend who keeps looking up this information. He says, "I'm not a witch finder," but what happens? He gets more involved in trying to find out what Tremblay was up to. He gets involved when Adeyeme's scandal happens. He's sly about it. He says, "Oh, you can confess to me, to the woman that's been brought there." He knows what he's doing. Like that's sly. So there is that sort of hypocrisy going that's happening, and yet at the same time, if you are a person of faith, you could look at this as that there are parts where it almost seems like God is working in mysterious ways, because when the explosion happens that basically messes up Lawrence basically about to become Pope, that prayer that they do, he knows that he has a crisis of faith. He knows that he's not the man for the job, but because certain events have happened and his ego has sort of come up to the point where he finally admits what he didn't admit to oh man, I forget his name. He's played by Stanley Tucci.
Aldo.
Yeah, Aldo. When he refused to tell Aldo that, he was like, "Oh no, Aldo, I'm not. I don't have my Pope name in mind." But then he has it right away when he's about to become Pope, and he knows that. And then this explosion happens that changes the course of things and leads to the change at the end. And if you're looking at through secular lens, it that could be coincidence, luck, certain events that happened that led to this, or it could be God working through mysterious ways, because that explosion obviously is a horrible event that happened outside the walls and led to people being hurt. And that's kind of what I keep coming away from the movie with each rewatch, looking at that. It's almost, in a way, it really is sort of this thing where you could kind of debate the secular aspect of what leads to the final result, or whether it was some kind of divine hand at play. So if there was anything that has really stood out to me more and more on rewatches, I would say it's that.
Obviously you said before this is your second favorite film of last year, 2024, but it also sounds to me much like how vital the screenplay is to the film itself. Would you also say the same thing in regards to how Edward Berger directs the movie itself?
Yes, yes, I would say that. Even though Berger wouldn't be my personal directing lineup, I just tend to be one of those guys that has a bias that usually if I'm putting you in my personal directing lineup, it's like some kind of like epic, sort of situation, a big movie, a long movie, and such like that. Yeah. But I did like his direction in this film. I don't know if it gets to show off as much as he does in maybe like All Quiet on the Western Front, which is obviously like a war film where it's compared to guys in these corners of rooms talking about what they're gonna do and what they're gonna vote for. So it's a little bit different on that. I do think this is more. I would say that this is definitely more of a, for me, in my opinion, it's more of a screenplay movie than a director's movie. Though I don't want to act like the direction is bad in the film. It's not. I do think there's a reason that Berger came close to getting a nomination. As we know, he eventually did not get a nomination for directing. Yeah. But I do think the screenplay is definitely the biggest strength of the film for me.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned All Quiet on the Western Front, because I mentioned it to Sarah Abraham, who was on for Women Talking, how, I delved a little bit in it with that episode, but for me, I realized after rewatching this, and especially rewatching All Quiet on the Western Front, maybe I'm just not really the biggest Edward Berger guy in the world, and that might be really my biggest issue with him as a director overall. It's just, I've only seen these two movies, and even when I saw All Quiet on the Western Front, I thought it was well crafted for what it was, and all the performances are good, but nothing really about it that stood out for me on an emotional level. Same thing here. I thought the performances were all good for what they were, nothing outstandish per se. And I thought some of the crafts work was good. Like the cinematography at times is quite decent for what it is. But at the end of the day, I just come out of it and I'm like, okay, what was the point of the story, Edward Berger? I don't know. He just seems very just not my kind of director, and it might also just be the fact that he's too on the nose with his visual symbolisms that he uses in his films, especially with this one, with how he uses the turtle as an example, which I just find so much on the nose, like eye rolling at times. It's only in it for the two scenes where we see Cardinal Lawrence meet up with Cardinal Vincent out in the garden in the middle of the film, and then again when we see the turtle at the end of the film where Cardinal Lawrence sees the turtle in the middle of wherever he's sitting, and he picks it up and puts it back in the little pond. But yeah, I do agree though that it is from a screenplay perspective, and maybe that's the other thing too about it is that I just feel like from a screenplay standpoint, there's not really like I say, I keep saying there's like it's on a surface level of how it's exploring these ideas and themes, but for me, there's no real bite to the dialogue. Like nothing about the conversations that these characters have really stand out in terms of their dialogue themselves. Because there are other screenplay winners that we've gotten around to, or even ones that I'll probably get into on the show down the road, that I thought offered much more memorability in terms of the dialogue or how witty it was. And I was like, oh, wow, like I ripped that line, the way that the writer described, a way a character felt within the moment, it just came across instantly. Like none of that was really in here for me. It was just very much, in my opinion, just felt almost like just, placeholders of like, we'll get around to this down the road and we'll rewrite the dialogue a bit and make it a bit more punchier, but they never got the time to it. I don't know. It seemed really bizarre to me that not really a whole lot of the dialogue really stood out for me. There was one line that I thought was close to doing that, and it's actually towards the beginning where we get that close. The closest the screenplay for me ever got that like sense of bite to the screenplay, and it was with Cardinal Lawrence, where he's talking to the people about how they're going to be stuck in there for however long it takes, and it's going to be hell. And he says, "Hell arrives tomorrow when we bring in the Cardinals," and it's a good line. I'm not gonna lie, but it's like it's one of the few lines of the film where I'm like, okay, there's the bite of this that I want from this screenplay. But again, it's just not there for me to be be entranced by the way the story is told. And we should also talk about something that I was also not the biggest fan of with All Quiet. And I'm curious to know what you think of the score.
First, can I say one last thing about the screenplay?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, we're going to be jumping around all over this place anyway, so you're good.
Yeah, I mean, because we should talk about the score, because even though it's obviously the screenplay has nothing to do with it, it is practical, which maybe this has become a thing with Berger, because he's really evolving now to become more of a consistent filmmaker, where the score is almost like another character in his movies, it seems. But I'll say about the screenplay stuff, I actually kind of get where you're coming from about lacking maybe some bites in certain like lines of dialogue that really hit you. I will say that I think one of the things that I do really like about the dialogue is that there are certain moments that are delivered in they're delivered in a way that they're not necessarily supposed to be funny or points of levity, but audiences see that they're supposed to be, but they're not delivered that way, so that it doesn't set off the tone of the film. So, for instance, there's a point where he's to meet with Lawrence is to meet with I forget the name of the guy who was he had the drinking problem, and he had revealed to him that, hey, there might be something up with
Wozniak,
Tremblay.
I think.
Yeah, I think it was Wozniak. And he was trying to warn him about Tremblay and the meeting he had with the Pope. And when he meets up with him, like the first thing Lawrence says to him is like, look, I don't have time to take your confession, in this sort of dismissal way that is supposed to be this. It's not supposed to be funny, but with certain audiences that I saw it with the movie, they kind of chuckled at that. Or the way some people responded to the vape, which the vaping scene that became I mean, that's not a line of dialogue, but the vaping scene, or or the moment with Sister Agnes that became this one of the biggest scenes of the year that a lot of people like to keep replaying and stuff like that.
Yeah, well, she does a little curtsy. Yeah.
Yeah. Like I remember when I saw that with my theater audience, they really responded to that scene. In terms of the score, so this is interesting because I feel like Berger's scores are so well. I mean, he's not the one doing the score.
No,
It's
Vocal Bertelman, who had already won an Academy Award and a BAFTA for All Quiet on the Western Front.
right, and his scores seem to be pretty divisive. Because they really are pretty intrusive in the movie to the point that they're basically a character in the film. And I've talked to people who love Conclave, and even they have their issues with the score. They feel like it's a little bit too intrusive.
Too on the nose.
Yeah, like I don't mind the score of Conclave. I actually love the score of Conclave and of All Quiet on the Western Front. Now, granted, I do believe Brutalist deserved to beat Conclave. Personally, I think Brutalist deserved to beat Conclave, and I personally would have voted for Babylon over All Quiet on the Western Front for score. Yeah. But I personally am a big fan of the scores because I do think that they're sort of a character in the film. That they really, to me, got me really to feel like I was part of the film and have every scene that was supposed to be important hit. But at the same time, I can't sit here and be like, oh, I don't understand how people don't like these scores, because they are very intrusive scores that if you're not vibing with them, it's very easy to find them to be like, oh God, can they just turn that down a bit?
Yeah, I am not the biggest fan of the score. I actually, even when I saw All Quiet on the Western Front and I originally gave it a positive rating or a slightly positive rating, even I said in my review I was not the biggest fan of Vocal Bertelman's score. It's too abrasive. It's on the nose. And it's same thing with this where it's creating tension building for moments that aren't really that much of a tension builder to begin with. Like in terms of how the scenes are presented, it's just popes walking into to the church and arriving for the first time, and it's created like this, violin, tension building moment, and it's like there's nothing really that exciting here. I don't know, and it's used and again, it's just used inappropriately all throughout the film, and it's weirdly enough the same issue that I have with Thomas Newman's music most of the times, if not all the times, where it's a lot of the score on its own would be fine or acceptable, but the way it's used in the film, it's like I just don't like. I don't care about this, about this scene, because the music is taking me out entirely, and that was definitely something. Even on my first viewing, when because honest to God, Lewis, I tried so hard on my first viewing to get invested in the movie, and even there was a section of the film that I was like, all right, I'm kind of interested in this story to see where it goes. Maybe it could build up to something by the end, to a better conclusion maybe we can get to, because I remember I was really tired from the first half. Like, God, I feel like I want to pass out and fall asleep. But every time that music came in, and during that small section where I was kind of getting invested in it, the music would sort of kick in, and I'd be like, no, just drown out the music. Don't listen to the music. Just watch what's happening. Don't let the score ruin this, okay? But yeah, I'm really not, like I said, I'm not the biggest fan of the score, period. And I just wish that it wasn't so, just again, in your face, which is just like, I would have liked it a more subtler score, but it just, I don't know if it's because of, him and Edward Berger and Vocal Bertelman's, intentions of trying to create that kind of mood for audiences, but we're just not much of an agreeable duo, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it does enhance it, but again, this is one of those situations where I get where people who aren't fans are coming from, because these are very. And I think that's probably maybe what, in a way, helped these scores stand out to the point that they got Oscar nominations, is that they are very loud and in-your-face scores.
The other thing I actually wanted to bring up was, what were your thoughts, and most importantly, do you recall what your crowd had, what was the crowd reaction you had gotten when you got towards the twist ending of the film.
So it's interesting. The first time I saw this movie, it was with what was definitely an older crowd, and like I said, they responded well to the movie, better than I thought that they would for a talkie movie like this. Compared to, again, bringing up Black Bag, watching that movie, literally a couple walked out. Nobody walked out on Conclave, and when we got to the ending, I remember there was this interesting. It's almost like it got really quiet. And as everybody kind of shuffled out, I was hearing there were these conversations in the background. Some guy was like, "Oh man, I think the Catholic Church is gonna be really pissed off at that ending." And of course, the funny thing is that I'm not sure the Catholic Church ever really talked about or put something out about this movie. At least not that I saw.
Except Megyn Kelly, I think it was, who was like
Megyn
pissed off at it.
Yeah, Megyn Kelly.
It's like if that's your only person who's criticizing this movie fully, it's like then you're okay.
Yeah, and of course when I saw it with family or friends afterwards to show them the movie, they were kind of like, oh, they were fine with the ending and stuff like that. I will say that I felt that one part of the end. So since this is a spoiler review, when Vincent wins, and I was not surprised that ultimately he ended up winning, because I got to tell you, even on first viewing, obviously the only time it matters is first viewing. First viewing, as soon as they introduced him, I knew he's winning. This is too. They were basically just telling you, you know how this is going to go. These guys are going to fight amongst each other, and it's going to end up going to somebody who wasn't really in the race.
Yeah.
And so that was, when we got to the twist, I had heard for months, oh, have you read the book? Have you read the book? The ending's going to be controversial. And because All Quiet on the Western Front was the last film that Berger, or the last adaptation that Berger tackled, I thought, is this going to be like a sad ending where you find out like some screwed up stuff about the guy or something like that?
Yeah.
And it turns out that, well, no, it's that he's in a very complicated situation involving, sort of his gender and such. And I kind of was like, oh, okay. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, that doesn't bother me compared to all the other stuff but I do, in rewatches, I will say that I can see how it might come off kind of forced. Like, almost like, oh, we got to come up with one final twist here. So I can see where that might be coming for folks who might feel like it's kind of forced at the end. But I didn't mind it. I was like, okay, yeah, one final twist to a movie that there's always stuff getting found out.
Funny enough, so going into the movie, I was expecting like a bigger twist where it's like, but then there's another twist, and it was revealed that like Cardinal Tremblay was the one responsible for killing the previous pope. I was like, oh, that would have been like, wow, okay, that was because they built up like throughout the film, even on my first watch, like you're building up to this like really big twist, and I'm like, is the twist that one of the priests killed the pope in his sleep? Like, was that it? And it's like, no, it's the fact that what's his name? Vincent from Afghanistan is an intersex priest. And I'm like, oh, okay. All right. I mean, I don't really have an issue with that personally, and I don't really, honestly, no, I'm not really sorry for saying this, but anyone who's clutching their pearls and is so offended by that, I'm like, come on, it's a book. That's all it is. And even if that were to happen, which I don't know if that has happened yet, where we've had an intersex priest, that's kind of cool. I think that's something new to add within a religious organization, especially when I think there's another religion I'm trying to think of that actually has well-known intersex persons within their society. But it's interesting that would come up. So if anything, for me, I see what they were trying to go for with the twist itself. But my issue was, I do agree with, I can see where you're coming from, where it feels a bit forced. My issue is that if the film had been building more and more on Lawrence's faith. And like, again, as I mentioned before, if it actually delved into these complex issues in a more interesting way, whether it's from how it's presented in a director's standpoint, how it's presented from the screenplay standpoint, to where Lawrence is at a point where he's like, it's trying to establish that Lawrence is, he doesn't really know what to do with his faith anymore. And the only faith that he has, sort of quote unquote, is to put Vincent up in charge. Because he feels like, oh, well, Vincent's your perfect candidate. And then he realizes that with this whole twist going on, it's at that moment he realized if the Pope trusted this guy, Vincent, enough, then that's enough for me to put my faith back into him. That would have been something that I would have been much more interested in, or be like, okay, that's an interesting, message to give the people. Again, if we had already developed the breadcrumbs and developed a lot more interesting characters throughout the film, which again is really something that for me, I've had a struggle on even on my third viewing, is that none of these other characters are that deep or complex. And I get it. It's a bottle rocket movie. Okay. We're in it. We're stuck in like a small confined area, but we have seen other films in the past who have dealt with bottle rocket films like this. And they are, even though they're not the most revolutionary art, character types we've seen before, they are still fascinating to watch. Like, I'm thinking of something like 12 Angry Men, where all the people inside the room have to argue and debate about whether or not they should put this kid for guilty or not guilty. And they start debating amongst themselves, and one by one, they all are in this, sort of this moment of like, what should we do? Because we're all in our moment within as we're telling each other these stories and voting on what to go for. Every one of them keeps switching around to where like, no, I vote for a non-guilty for the kid. And everyone has their I guess their moment of like doubting their own faith, so to speak, or their own consciousness, or whatever they've been led to believe so far within the trial. And that's a movie that I think that would be a really interesting, that's something that does it in a really interesting way without going too deep with its characters, but deep enough to where, again, it's not just a well-acted movie, but it's one that really does stick with you for me on with its messages and themes and ideas, whereas this one doesn't. You know what I mean? Like that, like that's something that I feel like was a big issue for me as a whole, especially when we got to the finale and to the twist in of itself.
I think I would say that's probably a result of 12 Angry Men is I feel like it really is about all the guys. I mean, obviously Henry Fonda's character is the protagonist, but
yeah.
Everybody is involved in sort of the result in terms of how they change their mind. Whereas I guess the difference is that this movie, it tries to really focus in on Lawrence, so everybody else is sort of more of even though it's a big ensemble and everybody kind of gets a moment, they're secondary, much more secondary to Lawrence and what's going on with him. Whereas 12 Angry Men, those are side characters, but they're very much always involved. They're constantly in there, whereas this is a bottle rocket film, but it's not like we see everybody in the same scene.
That is true. Yeah, it is mostly from Cardinal Lawrence's point of view, despite it being a big ensemble movie.
Yeah. And I think that's why it was so kind of made it easy during award season, that it was all about, none of the supporting. I think you remember there was one time during the season where everybody was wondering who could be the supporting actor nominee for this, and it never really became a thing. It was just about Ray Fiennes as the leading actor.
Yeah. Well, speaking of which, I think we might want to, because was there anything else you wanted to speak about in regards to the movie itself before we jump into the awards race?
No, I think we could go into the awards race, which is, it is sort of almost like we're reviewing the season that just happened in a way, because this was our lone screenplay winner, and again, a movie that did, I think, place pretty high on the picture ballot.
Interesting you bring that up, because as far as the awards base, which we've already been practically dropping hints throughout the entire review. We'll talk a bit more about it a little bit in just a moment, but before I do, let's get into our award space discussion for Conclave, in which it had premiered at the Telluride Film Festival on its opening day with rave reviews and had screened at other major film festivals such as the Toronto International Film Festival, Mill Valley Film Festival, where it won the Audience Overall Favorite Award, and also screened at the Middleburg Film Festival, where it won in a tie for Narrative Feature Film Award with September 5, which we will be covering on the show down the road. I don't know when that'll be, but it'll be down the road closer to around like late summer, early fall. We're going to try to get around to. And as far as the movie itself, Conclave, it made over $100 million on a production budget of $20 million. It was nominated for several awards, including 12 BAFTA nominations, where it won 4 for Best Film, British Film, Adapted, and Film Editing. Got 11 Critics' Choice Award nominations, winning only 2 for Adapted Screenplay, Cast Ensemble, and was nominated for 6 Golden Globe nominations which it only won Screenplay there in a bit of an upset. It was also nominated from various guilds such as the Producers Guild, Directors Guild, American Cinema Editors Eddie Awards, as we call them, the American Society of Cinematographer Award nominations, a Costume Design Guild, Art Directors Guild, and the Screen Actors Guild Award, where it was nominated for 2, and it won Best Ensemble for its cast. And despite its 8 Academy Award nominations, director Edward Berger missed the lineup, as we said before, despite getting nominations from Golden Globes, Critics' Choice, DGA, and BAFTA. The last person, believe it or not, Lewis, I don't know if you remember this, the last person to get all 4 of the televised precursor nods and miss the Oscar directing lineup was Bradley Cooper for A Star Is Born.
I remember that.
Yeah, I was hoping. Yeah, I was hoping you did. As far as the adapted lineup that it was up against, it won over such films as A Complete Unknown, Emilia Perez, Nickel Boys, and Sing Sing. So, Lewis, we already went through some of the reasonings potentially for adapted, why it won adapted screenplay, but are there any other additional things you want to add to why it managed to win the lone adapted screenplay Oscar?
I mean, again, I think the fact that you really got to hold on to every word that these guys are saying throughout the movie to really understand what's going on and why certain things are important as the plot moves along. So I think that had a lot to do with it. And the big part of it is that I am of the belief, and again, I really wish they would release the tallies because I love to theorize about this. I do believe that it was number 2 in Best Picture. So I think that was a big reason why it won Screenplay. When you look at its competition, Nickel Boys and Sing Sing didn't get into. Nickel Boys got into Best Picture, but that was the only thing got nominated for after picture was Screenplay. Nickel Boys did win at WGA, but Conclave wasn't eligible there. But that's why that happened. Sing Sing didn't get into Best Picture. Complete Unknown didn't win anything. That did not win anything at all. And Emilia Perez was in the middle of a big meltdown. So I think it was just very easy for a lot of voters to kind of just check off Conclave, considering how much they liked it.
Yeah, that was a really, that was interesting race. Because Christian Hanna, who had been on the podcast, he had thought early on, as much did I, admittedly, early on I thought, oh, okay, maybe Sing Sing, if it's going to win picture, it's probably going to win screenplay at the Oscars. It didn't. Nickel Boys, you're right, WGA, it was the only WGA ineligible film, and I should bring this up now in case I don't bring it up for the Talk to Her episode down the road. This is the second time that Jaycox has been nominated for Writers Guild, lost its what some of us thought would have been an easy slam dunk win for Writers Guild, and he lost to the documentary filmmaker film. And the first time was for Gangs of New York. He lost to a non-Oscar nominated film, which was Bowling for Columbine, written and directed by Michael Moore. At least he wrote. It's a weird way to. I don't want to go into details about why that happened, but that'll be for another episode. And then this year he lost to Ramel Ross, who is a known documentary filmmaker and ended up winning the Writers Guild over Jay Cox, so I find that really interesting. You're right, Emilia Perez had a bit of a meltdown, but I would also argue that musicals don't usually win screenplay at the Oscars, whether they're original or adapted. Yeah. Even something like La La Land and My Fair Lady and Mary Poppins, they lost their screenplay categories.
Yeah, for a musical, just to get nominated in screenplay is a big win for a musical.
Yeah, and as far as one of your favorite films of last year, in fact, of all time, A Complete Unknown, I'm busting you, by the way.
Yeah. For those listening who don't know, I was not a fan of Complete Unknown.
Yeah, which actually surprised me, I got to say, because you and I, we established off air before that we were like one of the bigger fans of Maestro, and to hear you come back out of A Complete Unknown, you're like, I don't get it, guys. I'm like, oh no.
Yeah, I just didn't. I've thought about this for some time because I was a little taken aback as seeing how popular that film is.
Mm-hmm.
I think at the end of the day, maybe it was more of a vibes movie. And the thing with vibes movies, I've always said, is that if you can't get on the vibe with that movie, it's just going to go over your head. And there are vibes movies I've loved, and there are vibes movies I just have not been able to get with. And I think this was just one of those movies that Complete Unknown did not work for me.
I should also point out that A Complete Unknown, I never bought for a second as an awards-winning contender movie. I always thought it was going to get nominated for Best Picture the day the trailer dropped, but I never bought it as a like multi-Oscar winning or even like an Oscar-winning type film. Not even for sound, I never bought it as. I always knew it would get into picture. Chalamet would finally get a second Oscar nomination out of this the moment they announced it. Back in like 2020, I said, all right, whenever this comes out, he'll get a second nomination for that. And I figured it was going to get into sound because of Paul Massey, Donald Sylvester, Todd A. Maitland, and David Gianmarco. It's like, you have a sound team like that working on a Mangold film? Okay, yeah, that's getting in. But I was admittedly surprised and taken aback that it got a director nomination. And which this is going to tie into why I personally just did not think. I know you're under the belief, Lewis, like many people are, that Conclave was likely the runner-up for picture. I actually don't. I, honest to God, think that. First off, I don't think it was even close to winning Best Picture. Even the moment I saw it, I never bought it as a Best Picture winner, especially when it missed the director lineup at the Oscars, which. It is, like, we've had recent films win Best Picture without a director nomination, but for its director to not even be involved, and this is probably a more coincidental thing and more conspiracy theory type thing I'm dabbling into here, but to have a film like that not get in for director, and there's no way for Edward Berger to win as a writer or as a producer, because he didn't produce the thing, and he didn't write the damn thing. It just made me ask questions like, you guys really think Conclave is going to win Best Picture? Especially when it lost to PGA, but it won the BAFTA. And I don't know about you, Lewis, but I even mentioned on Twitter too at that time where if you have a film that loses the PGA prize but wins BAFTA for Best Film, since 2000, no one has been able to break that curse. Like films like Roma, Power of the Dog, Fellowship of the Ring, anytime they did that, it's kind of a curse, whether it's coincidental or not. It's like, that's kind of a curse to be like, no one has been able to do that. Not even 3 Billboards could do it. And it lost out to the PGA DGA winner, which was that year Shape of Water. This year was Anora, which I'll probably talk about on somewhere down the road, which I won't say. I'll be very hush-hush about what that is I'm referring to. But as far as the adapted screenplay win, you're right. It was probably the one film that really stuck with voters on their minds in terms of how the screenplay was presented and acted by its actors in the film, with Ray Fiennes, Stanley Tucci, Isabella Rossellini, and such. But I also think going back to Jack Mahane's article when he wrote on Anatomy of a Fall, and even I said this too about The Crying Game, it's a mystery / thriller with lots of twists and turns. And more than not, the Academy tends to go for those kind of movies. When it's like a mystery thriller with lots of twists and turns. Chinatown's another one, The Crying Game, Anatomy of a Fall I already mentioned. Usual Suspects is another one too. They always love it when you do that, when you have that kind of screenplay within your, you have that within your script. And it's also the type of screenplay, I don't know if you'll agree with me on this next part here, but it's the type of screenplay that the writer's branch would drool over as adapting what was practically an airport novel and making it this intriguing, political thriller of sorts that, as you even said, intrigued an average audience member is what likely got Peter Strawn the win. Would you agree with that as well, or no?
Oh yeah, I think so, because again, to do a movie that's mostly just talking, general audiences don't appreciate that to the levels that critics do at times. Like there are movies that critics like that general audiences don't respond as well to because they have issues with all the talking. But this one was different. It was able to break through and be successful with general audiences, even with all the talking. I am curious. So, what do you think was probably number 2 in Best Picture?
I actually think it was The Brutalist. I understand that, yes, on a preferential ballot, it probably wasn't as strong. But here's why I think it was The Brutalist that was likely the runner-up for picture. The fact that when you look at all, it's the same thing we saw with Oppenheimer, with the Oppenheimer year, where even though, and I'm actually curious to know, because I think we're recording this a bit ahead of schedule than Kevin Jacobson when he does his and the runner-up series for Best Picture, so I'm curious to know what his pick is. But I personally think it was The Brutalist, partly because, much like we saw with Oppenheimer, the only other film that managed to win more than just an Oscar or two or anything that was that significant was Poor Things, which it won lead actress, production design, costumes, and makeup. It still had the actress win. It was, even though it was like third or fourth, second or third for adapted and director that year, it still got those other major wins on its hands. And I would also argue, too, the fact that The Brutalist was a lot stronger in the lead actor debate overall led me to believe that if Brody's film was that strong with the Academy to where he was able to overrule Ralph Fiennes, then something tells me that The Brutalist was likely the runner-up for Best Picture. Because, again, you're up against Conclave, which couldn't even get Ralph Fiennes an Oscar win. Not that I thought he was ever going to win to begin with. But you're also dealing with a film like The Brutalist, which does harken back to some of the more respected, admired Best Picture nominee darlings, but they're not films that typically win. You think of stuff like Power of the Dog, Dr. Zhivago, Roma is another one we got, where even Brokeback Mountain to a certain degree, where it's like we respect it, we admire it, but we're not head over heels for it like everyone else is. And I feel like that's the case with The Brutalist in terms of like that being like the potential runner-up. That's how I feel personally. Again, just the overall
I don't think
wins.
that's a wild. I don't think that's a wild theory. I mean, I'm still sticking with Conclave just because it did win SAG and BAFTA, and screenplay traditionally means that you're pretty close. But I wouldn't be shocked if they released the tallies and Brutalist was number 2. Because it did win a couple Oscars, including acting, and we do know that it probably came close to winning at BAFTA. So I wouldn't be shocked.
Well, and I also know that what's his name, Brady Corbet, was probably the runner-up for director easily.
Yeah.
Because no one else was ever going to challenge Sean Baker for director. In fact, I think both you and I, like once the Golden Globes started, we're like, okay, I guess Brady Corbet's going to win director. Which was, again, like another reason why I think again The Brutalist was the runner-up for picture, but yeah, it just like I don't disagree with you that Conclave was likely top 3, top 5 maybe, but at the end of the day, I really do think The Brutalist was likely the runner-up for picture, just again because of the wins that it got and how close it was to winning director at the end of the day. I mean, yeah. Brady Corbet only won Golden Globe. He lost Critics' Choice and he lost the DGA, but he still won the BAFTA too, which I keep forgetting actually that he won that award.
Yeah.
But I also, so I have a couple other questions to ask you then. Why do you think we were all so kerfuffled or confused by like, why was it that despite, and we should also point out this too, that the Editors Guild came out after the Oscar winners were announced.
Yeah.
So that would have thrown us even more of a wrench. But why was it that we were all thinking that Conclave was going to win editing despite BAFTA going for it? Do you have any like possible theories as to what happened with that category in of itself, or what?
You mean what? I think we kind of just went for it because BAFTA went for it, but I think ultimately why Anora beat it is because I think at the end of the day, editing this year was a kind of chaotic race. And I think at the end of the day, because it didn't help the fact that a lot of critics just got behind challengers, and challengers didn't even get nominated,
and even won the Critics' Choice Award too.
Yeah, and I think so. I think what ended up happening is that, and you can see it on the anonymous ballots. I think everybody just kind of just voted for whatever their favorite movie was for editing, and thus Anora was able to win off of that. I think it just comes down to that, and I understand that editing for some time wasn't really linked to what won Best Picture, but this has now happened 3 straight years.
Yep.
So I want to keep an eye on if that's a potential new sort of current era of the Oscars thing to keep an eye on. That people seem to just be checking off whatever their favorite movie is for editing. Because the thing with editing is that there is an art form to editing. There is such a thing as good or bad editing, but most general audience folks, which the industry has a lot of general audience tastes, and it's very easy for them to be like, well, I don't understand what was the difference between this movie's editing and this movie's editing, so they might just check off whatever their favorite movie is.
Yes, and I also want to point out to our audience to back up Lewis as well in terms of the editing category. So since 2000, when BAFTA became a reliable precursor for the Oscars, because again, before Gladiator, with like American Beauty backwards, we would only be able to use BAFTA after the Oscars. So BAFTA wasn't really a reliable precursor for editing to begin with, or any of these other categories overall. But there's only one film in this editing lineup that managed to win the Oscar for editing without a BAFTA nomination. Do you know what it is?
I'm drawing a blank. Didn't get nominated at BAFTA?
It didn't get nominated at BAFTA, but it still won the Oscar for editing. And this is from 2000 to now.
Yeah, I'm completely drawing a blank. What could it be? Like, what is it?
The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo.
Oh!
And I realized this too, and I think you hit it on the nail though, is that exception of that, I think going forward with this editing category, we need to learn a couple things. One, you need to have the Editors Guild and BAFTA nominations. You need to have those on your side. And obviously it does help if you're a Best Picture frontrunner. That helps. But on top of that, I also think that if you're not the likely favorite film of the lineup, get a sound nomination. Because that can help your case sometimes. You know, it helped with Dune. Dune managed, much like Anora, Dune managed to win editing without winning a single televised precursor. It lost the Editors Guild, it lost the BAFTA, and it lost the Critics' Choice Award. And it still won the Oscar for editing. Now, granted, it was already like a big tech sweeper overall, and it had won and swept the sound categories pretty easily, or at least majority of them. But with this year, Anora, despite not having the sound nomination, it still showed up at BAFTA and Editors Guild. We all knew, or at least most of us thought, okay, Anora's probably going to have a decent night where it's going to win, 3 or 4 Oscars. Picture, director, screenplay, maybe lead actress. And at that point, you look at the other editing nominees with Brutalist, Wicked, Emilia Perez, and Conclave. It's like, what else could win the editing category? The only one really within that criterion who had like a BAFTA and Editors Guild nomination already were Conclave, Emilia Perez, and Anora. So you're practically down to those 3 to be like, which one do you think is going to win? And like you said, the one that was considered the favorite by the Academy was Honora, which I haven't gotten a chance to rewatch that since my LA screening, but hopefully I will by the time this gets up. This episode comes online. I'll have already gotten a chance to see it, and I'll be able to take my own notes as to what happened with the editing category. Because even when I saw Honora, I thought to myself, this actually has a really good shot at winning Best Picture, but I don't know about editing if they're going to go for this. They might go for something else, but you're right. It just ended up being in a year where there wasn't a whole lot of passion for the category like we have in other years, and it just boiled down to what was the film that they liked the most, and it was Honora.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what happened.
Yeah. Which I'm still, I cannot believe that managed to win editing. Like, once I think you even texted me on the night of when I was over at Nico and Zeddy's in Chicago when the three of us were watching the Oscars, and the moment Honora won editing, I think you texted me right after. You're like, well, I guess I'm coming back on for your show for Conclave. So
yeah, I remember that.
That was funny. That was hilarious.
It's interesting because when that editing came down, it was almost like when it had its Critics' Choice PGA and DGA weekend.
Yeah.
It was like all at once you realize, oh, it's gonna win director and picture, and honestly at that point I thought, yeah, I don't think Demi's winning actress.
Yeah. Oh wow. Holy shit. Oh man.
I mean, it worked out for me personally because I won multiple Oscar predicting things by successfully predicting Honora was going to have its best night, but even I didn't predict her to win editing.
Oh my god. I want to know who's the one sneaky bastard who predicted editing, because every time I contact someone, they're like, did you predict editing? Did you predict it? Did you? No one predicted it for editing. Who the hell predicted this for editing? I want to know what their secret formula was, but I think we figured it out once it won editing. And as we always say with each year, Lewis, we always say hindsight is always 20/20. We go through the season. Once we get through it, we get through this whole autopsy, whatever you want to call it, and we're like, all right, now we know where the breadcrumbs were and what were the signs that led us to this moment, especially with Demi Moore. As you said, like the moment Honora won, PGA, DGA, and Critics' Choice that same weekend, we're like, okay, maybe Demi Moore doesn't win it. And yeah, so I just find that really interesting. So the other is a couple other questions I did want to ask before we sign off for the show regarding with other awards things. Why was it that Edward Berger was able to get through Golden Globes, Critics' Choice, DGA, and BAFTA, and he missed the Oscar lineup? Like, what are some theories that you have there? What happened there?
Well, I mean, this is the second time now that he missed. Though he was definitely more favored this time around than last time. Last time was kind of more speculation because of the whole international director thing. I think ultimately, they felt that that movie was more of a screenplay than a director's thing, which I personally feel that way about Honora. But they love Honora so much that they're still going to, and obviously they gave Sean the win, that they love the movie enough that they still nominated him for director. With Berger, maybe, and another thing that just literally just came up in my mind as I'm talking right now, Baker makes movies where he's telling his own story. Berger, and we're seeing this if you look at what his future projects are, he seems to like to adapt stories.
Oh,
and
that's a good point.
If that might be something that sort of affects him.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, especially when you see, because even that actually might be the other reason as to why, even looking back, that also might be another reason why someone like Paul Greengrass or Ben Affleck missed their director lineups in their own years with Captain Phillips and Argo, where their directors, because I honest to God thought it was the fact that they were like in populist filmmaking, mystery thrillers type thing. But that is something to look at, though, is the fact that he is adapting someone else's work into film. He's not actually creating his own screenplay. Then again, we could technically say the same thing about James Mangold, except Mangold, I don't know if you'll agree with me on this, though, is that Mangold was known as like a previous nominee in the category, and he was the only one from this field, in this terrible field, I should mention, that ended up getting into the lineup because he had already gotten an adapted screenplay nomination for Logan, and he got a producer nomination for Ford v. Ferrari.
I was about to say.
Yes.
I was about to say,
sorry, here I am.
Cool
just
Best Picture nomination.
I'm changing history here, folks. This is in the revisionist almanac. So yeah, but no, that is a good point that he is adapting his own work, whereas Sean Baker is telling his own stories. But I also do wonder, though, if the fact that, like, again, you have James Mangold as the previous nominee, and it's like, here, welcome to the club. You're back. You're finally going back to your grassroots, type of directing you're known for doing, like Walk the Line and things like that. But I also do think that Coily Farge, or Coily Farja, I don't know how to pronounce her name. I apologize. Sorry. For The Substance, even when I saw it, when I finally got around to watching the movie, I knew she was getting in. Because if the film was that strong for picture, her vision was, then she was easily going to get in for director, because it always felt a little bit like some of her influence she had on the film was very Kubrick-like at times. And it is a very distinct vision. Like, I'm not really the biggest fan of the movie, and I'll talk about it on another time down the road in more detail, but I'm very indifferent on the film. At the same time, though, I really, really respect what Coily Farge did with her vision as a director, and it's impressive that this is her second film that she did, because beforehand she did, I think it was it might have been Revenge.
It was Revenge. I want to say it was Revenge. Yeah. With Substance, that could have been, and maybe that's another thing, is that it was definitely her own vision. If you watch that film, like if in someone else's hands, that's kind of like your typical sort of body horror, sort of neon film or something like that.
Yeah.
But then in her hands, it has this distinct style. And it's like, I like to kind of half joke. I remember half joking all the time, telling people that you could like play this movie at the club, and it feels like it would fit in because of the style it has.
Despite it getting, 5 nominations and it won makeup at the Oscars. It's like, this never happens. What the hell? The Academy's actually being cool for once. Okay, nice. So, and then I'm looking through. Okay, so the other question I have to ask, how did this manage to get into costumes and production design at the Oscars, Conclave?
I think it's pure love for the film. Now, I might surprise you by saying this. I actually think the movie personally got a little over nominated than what I personally would have nominated it for. I would not, it's not in my personal ballot for text. Like, I think movies like something like a Furiosa or even a Gladiator 2, I think I personally was more impressed with the production and costume designs of those movies. Not to say that I have any issues with the production or costume designs in this movie, but they didn't wow me or were that distinct to me in comparison to other stuff that was out there. So I think that was just pure love of the film. And not just that, it's that if you look at the smaller guilds that a lot of people forget and gloss by, this movie did win its categories in a lot of smaller tech guilds. Like while Wicked was like dominating in like the fantasy section, it was like not dominating like the contemporary categories. And I think that just kind of showed how much the film was beloved, and that love got it into categories that you could argue was maybe not necessarily like anything that was that distinct compared to other films that didn't get nominated.
Yeah, that's fair. I did remember from the production design, although this is pretty recent though, as a whole. Even though we're saying, I remember, it's like, yeah, it's recent. I get it. With the exception of Conclave, that's a really good production design lineup. Like Dune,
Yes.
Wicked, what was the other one? Nosferatu. Production design.
Brutalist.
Brutalist was the other one. Yeah, that was like really, really good lineup overall. And even as I was over with my buddies with Nico and Zeddy, we're like, they're showing off all the nominees. I'm like, that's a great line. I wouldn't mind that winning. I like Wicked. I'm indifferent on Wicked as a whole, but I'm okay with its production design and costume wins, because I did think those two were easily the best aspects of its text for that film overall. And I'm so happy that Nathan Crowley finally got his win. That was great.
Yeah.
And yeah, and as far as like the lead actor, the other acting category, and things like that, it's like, yeah, Ray Fiennes, we kind of, we don't really need to dissect too much into that, other than like yeah, Ray Fiennes was going to come back because it was like we had nominated him since English Patient, and we were like, oh, sorry, here's your nomination. We should have nominated you a couple times in between, but here you go. And then Isabella Rossellini, I have a quick funny story to tell you, Lewis, and I don't know if I told you this before yet. I was talking to my buddy Juan Carlos Ollano from the 1 Inch Barrier podcast, and that summer we had found out that Conclave was coming out for awards contenders, and I finally got around to watching Blue Velvet. It might have been just in time for the My Beautiful Laundrette episode. I was talking with Juan, and I said, wouldn't it be funny if Isabella Rossellini finally got her Oscar nomination overdue for Conclave, like for this movie, just because she had been such a respected actress amongst the industry for so long, and she never really got her deserved flowers, so to speak, and this was the movie to do it. And Juan was like, yeah, it might happen. I was like, all right, let's put a pin in it, let's see what happens, and then here we are, Oscar nominee Isabella Rossellini.
And I think the fact that she was basically the face of one of the biggest scenes of the year had a lot to do with that. That was a nomination that also I think was pushed by the fact that there was that scene just kind of stuck out and became a big part of sort of like a lot of memes and stuff online, and sort of was one of the scenes of the film that people remembered the most.
The memes and edits were pretty funny. I'm not gonna lie. Like, as someone who's not the biggest fan of this movie, pretty much at all, I will say the memes and edits were pretty funny. So,
and it's kind of interesting because you wouldn't think that this is the kind of movie that maybe like Gen Z like starts memeing up, but it ended up being one of the most. It was like up there with Challengers for like one of the most meme films of the year. Yeah.
You have a love triangle with like a hot, steamy, sexy romance, and then Conclave with a bunch of popes deciding who's going to be a priest who's going to decide who's going to be the next pope.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like completely different movies. I'm trying to think if there's anything else in regards. Actually, the last question I should ask for you is, do you think this deserved the adapted screenplay win, and would you have given it any other wins as well?
Well, I think it shouldn't surprise you at all that I would say yes. It deserved it. It is what I would have voted for if I were an Academy member. But it's the only thing I would have voted for, though it would have been number 2 on my ballot, on my Best Picture ballot. As much as I do really love Isabella and Ray Fiennes' performances. There were other performances that stood out to me more in comparison to them. And again, to me, this movie for me is basically it's mainly about the story. That's what I love about the movie. It's not even necessarily the text of the film. So it's basically what I would vote for, but it's the only thing that I personally would have voted for.
Yeah, I'm sorry to disappoint you guys, but you know my answer for this. My answer is no. I would not have voted for this for adapted screenplay. It's in my opinion, a pretty weak lineup. It's funny because I remember the year before we had, which when I get to American Fiction, I'll see how I feel on a rewatch for that. But I actually remember that being a much stronger adapted screenplay lineup, and we had, and then to go from that to this, I'm like, okay, I guess. My vote actually would have been easily Nickel Boys. I thought that was easily the best one, and in fact, I wish Nickel Boys had been nominated for more Oscars, like cinematography, director for Ramel Ross. But we know why he didn't get in, because Amazon not only dropped the ball, but Ramel Ross is not a known director to that branch. He is now, hopefully, and I really look forward to seeing what he does next as a filmmaker. And I have my own issues with Nickel Boys, as I said on the Women Talking episode, but I'm really happy for Ramel Ross getting that adapted screenplay nod, and at least he got the DGA first time feature win and WGA win. So there's that. So, yeah.
That would not have been a bad choice, because I do like the Nickel Boys screenplay.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Yeah, your most recent lone screenplay winner is finally on here, and like I said, folks, we've been teeing it up for a while now, and I'm glad to finally deliver you guys the goods. So yeah. So once again, I just want to say thank you so much, Lewis, for being here on the show. Before we sign off, is there anything else you'd like to plug in on where our listeners can follow you along?
Well, I mean, I don't know if by the time this comes out, if I'll be right back to doing content, but incidentally, even on break, I've been gaining subscribers somehow. So, but if you, for any folks who might be interested, go to mendezmoviereport.com. Takes you to my Substack. I do movie reviews, Oscar projections. I am going to be doing some new best of lists. And if you want to find me on social media, you can find me on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, X, Blue Sky, Letterboxd, or even the Award Expert app under Mendez Movie RPT.
Nice. Yeah. And if you guys haven't followed them yet, I would highly encourage. I don't know why you guys haven't followed them since the Little Caesar episode. That was like over a year ago now since we recorded that. What are you doing? Get on it. But yeah, follow Lewis if you can. Great guest to have on. I hope to have you back on down the road. I think we have a couple movie ideas we have in mind for you to come back on for the show down the road, and we'll definitely talk more about that when we get there. But probably won't happen anytime soon. But definitely really appreciate you coming on here and being a great soldier and trooper for Conclave. Because at least, as I always say before, it's much better to have a conversation where where both of us where we both disagree, rather than both of us being so, yeah, it was a movie. Anyways, moving on. Because those are the former is much more interesting than the latter, I feel. But yeah, but no, it was great to have you on the show, Lewis, and I once again I hope to have you back on down the road. As for me, you can follow me and the show through Linktree under at Matthew995, where you can follow along on all my social media accounts such as Twitter and Letterboxd. On the same link I provide on the same page, I provide a link where you can listen to more episodes of the show. Also, as this episode is coming out, which is May 2nd, this should be out by, I have already established a YouTube channel where all episodes will be on there as well. So if you don't have any of the audio podcasts such as Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon, Music, whatever it's called now, iHeartRadio, whatever the case may be, check out YouTube. All of our episodes should be on there by the time this one comes up. And if you're interested in being in the hot seat like Lewis has here today, let me know, and hopefully we can arrange that happening soon. In the meantime, we hope you enjoyed listening to this episode, and we hope to see you at the movies. Take care, guys.